Welcome everybody to the governance working group meeting of Tag Contributor Strategy. There's a new person here to understand is Tag Contributor Strategy rotates through its various working groups for weekly meetings because we have several working groups. This is governance working group, which is primarily concerned with governance of the individual projects and helping them mature their governance as the project grows. But we also end up discussing some general contributor strategy stuff here. As far as I know, nobody's showing up representing an individual project, so I don't expect to take time for any project questions, although somebody may actually show up later. And this is an official meeting of the CNCF, so the CNCF Code of Conduct applies. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The first one is Dawn couldn't be here today. I actually went ahead and submitted a draft for the election governance template for documentation, which is nice because that'll complete our documentation for all of the governance templates. And then it'll just be a matter of maintenance as we make changes. I've taken a quick look at that. One of the things that Dawn raised there is that the template may still actually be recommending civs, in which case we actually honestly need to update it because I don't want to be recommending civs to projects. And there's some other minor things. Have you had a chance to take a look at that, Carolyn?
Sorry, I can't find the mute. No, I haven't done that, but I can review that this afternoon.
Okay, cool. I mean, part of it is this is kind of brief because the to-do for writing a sort of more, step-by-step oriented guide around running a public election for an open source project is actually on my assigned list of to-dos. I just have not gotten to it yet.
I mean, that wouldn't go in this document though, right? That would be kind of a separate, this is how you run an election. Okay, yeah.
And it would be linked from this document, right? As in once it's written, we would add a link in the appropriate sections of this document. Particularly like under election procedure, right? We would say, see this for, a longer guide on how you would run an election. Because we have some stuff that's become relatively generic and has worked well for projects, things like assigning election officers, for example. But we want to have that in writing so the projects who haven't done it can do it themselves. Because for one thing, I can't be an election officer for every CNCF project.
Really? Are you sure?
Yeah, oddly enough. One thing, at a certain point, I start getting them mixed up, which is bad. I actually had one time where we had both Knative and open telemetry elections going on at the same time, and I actually sent out a message that was for the wrong election.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
But very understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But take a look at the rest of that because I'd like to actually get it, be nice to get it finished off. Even if it's a little bit bare bones right now, it's better to have it there than the inline comments.
Okay.
As we decided earlier. Okay.
So you're at the very bottom, you like link over to like lazy consensus, but I'm not seeing that actually used in the document. Is that just an artifact from something that was earlier in here?
No, it's actually referred to under.
Because I'm not seeing it, and I want to be able to make sure that like I want to be careful when we're recommending lazy consensus, basically.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't see it used either.
Right.
It
and
is,
I
it
want
is
to be
actually.
careful.
Hold on, I need to find the section.
Yes, please do, because yeah, this is one of those things where like I want to be
Decision
careful.
process.
Okay.
But it's actually not linked. Oh, so
Oh.
we do need to actually fix up some of the linking thing, because you're right. And it's actually not the only link that's supplied at the bottom
That one
that
just
is not actually linked from any of the text.
that one stuck out to me because I want to be very nuanced when we recommend being able to do lazy consensus as like a primary decision process, because it it's not the best documented.
Yeah. The um
And you can tell me like the if I'm thinking of things that are like if it's not a problem, but I don't think I want to be able to like encourage projects to be able to like not document their decisions, and lazy consensus has a habit of doing that.
yeah, I mean, the thing is that a project goes through quite a number of um decisions.
Right.
Um um did you there we are.
Maybe
Goes through
specifying
quite
for
a
like
number of decisions that just really don't call for a vote.
right, and that's fine.
And one of the
Here, hold
problems
on.
we've run into when reviewing a couple of people's governance,
Mhm.
like I think this came up in Kita's governance, actually.
Okay.
Keta, whatever it is.
Okay, fine.
In
I mean,
their
I think
governance
you're happy
was
you're saying
their
it.
governance actually said that they took a vote on every single thing,
Oh God.
which I know that materially they don't.
Right, and so like that, I want it to be able to match reality, and I also
Yeah.
want to like. I think my concern is I don't want to encourage a, a decision making process that leads towards less documentation rather than more when we're talking about elections. I think I want to be explicit that lazy consensus is fine for technical decisions and that, but if you're talking like actual governance thing and like who gets like decision making power, I want to be more direct.
Yeah, no, and I think that section. So, if you don't mind putting a comment in that section, just saying that we want to be more explicit about different kinds of decisions.
Yes, I can do. I can
Um,
definitely put in the review for like the
yeah,
decision.
I
Like
mean,
it's the decision process. Like we're talking about consensus, but then we're linking the lazy consensus, and I'm like, I want to be more clear in here.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I mean, part of it is that the template itself is a little bit more explicit, because
Oh,
the template actually gives a list of which decisions require an actual vote.
yes. Okay, that is actually helpful. I think I was um, I think I was might have been reviewing this in a vacuum as well. So okay.
Yeah, the
All right.
well, no, but I mean, it could use more explanation in the documentation as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? The just expand on the idea that, hey, some decisions are really small and don't require an actual vote,
Mm-hmm.
and can be made if nobody objects,
Yeah.
and other decisions do require a formal
Okay.
vote.
All right. I'm just gonna add a single comment in here about like the how we get to consensus, how we can help document decision better, just so that we've at least like I'm a little concerned about that. um, I think I had something else, but I'll we can move on a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. The uh,
Yeah,
so
all right. I'll do a more comprehensive review because I
yeah.
can see some pieces in here where like the uh do we want to be making like anti-recommendations in here is kind of my worry. Um
What do you mean by that?
like one looking at like well not recommended, you can't elect everyone all at once. That feels like an anti-recommendation, almost like an
Yeah.
anti-pattern. And I'm not sure if we
Um,
want to be able to even highlight that in these. Like don't give people ideas basically.
yeah. Well, again, go ahead and comment on that.
Okay.
I mean, well, basically, this is saying, what is the alternative to having
Ah,
staggered 2-year terms, which is what's
okay.
recommended. The and it that could, maybe explain better, but it is something that some projects do, where they reelect their entire steering committee every year.
Oh right, okay.
And that ends up actually being less disruptive if you have a project that has a fairly small pool of contributors, and as a result, it's actually the same people getting reelected most of the time.
Which is actually more common than some of the like
Yeah.
that we don't have that
So
many of like the really big
yeah.
projects. We have a
Anyway,
lot of small.
if you want to go ahead and put a comment there,
Okay. Yeah.
the
I think I want to be able to reframe this to the alternative to being able to do staggered terms is like the all at once thing. I think the challenge is that like we have to be able to have these be available for both like the really big projects and also like the much smaller ones as well. So I can see the challenge here for trying to be able to have both.
So
Okay. You'd mentioned that you want to be able to get this together quickly. Is quickly like
oh, you know, I mean, it would
or-
be nice to have it before. It would be nice to have it before KubeCon, but if we can't, we can't.
we got 10 days. We
The
can work on this one. Okay.
um okay, yeah. Emily says she'll be joining us in 10 minutes.
Lovely.
So okay. Do
Do we
and
also need to be able to review the template as well, or did that happen previously?
the only changes that are being made to the template are pulling out the inline comments.
Oh, okay then. All right.
Because that's this whole documentation process, right? Is that our
Got it.
original documentation was all inline comments, and we're ripping those out and putting them in documentation that can go on the web. Okay. So the other thing is Carolyn launched this thing of having a roadmap for the tag, which would be good.
Wait, I just have to say, I love that you blamed the roadmap on me.
You opened the issue.
Oh, I know. That's just because I'm a sucker for volunteering
Yeah, I know.
issues. And then suddenly now it's my thing. No, I was just documenting what people said.
Right, pointing out something that we should have done anyway is not blaming.
We were writing a template for how to make a roadmap, and I think I pointed out we don't have a roadmap, so we should follow our own advice and make one.
Yeah, and so Dawn put in some there. I just want to make sure nobody had anything else, like the ones for this working group, so sort of immediate roadmap. Three things. One is finishing up this, making it easier for projects to run elections. And that's finishing the documentation here, including the additional document that says, here's a sort of timeline of running an election. The other thing, which is at least currently entirely on me, is making it possible for CNCF to host Electo instances for projects if they want to use Electo for elections, which was kind of the whole idea around creating Electo in the first place. So, and then the other thing is, and for that matter, have a sort of mentoring training thing for people being election officers, because a lot of projects are going to come to us and say, hey, we have, 2 people who volunteered to be election officers, but they have no idea what they're doing. Can one of you please guide them through this? The next thing is I help, continue helping existing CNCF projects improve their governance. One is we need to actually create a sort of template and form for the routine governance review that happens before graduation.
I have a question for you in general. We've talked a bit about how our tag is going to interact with projects in a more formal way when it comes to moving through some of the graduation stages. How is that going? Is that happening yet, or is that still something we're proposing to start in the future?
Right. It's starting with the governance review for graduated level.
Okay.
Because we need to bring these to the TOC, because the other one was to do a sort of contributor a contributor setup review at incubating level. That is, as a project goes into incubating, they should be prepared to accept contributors. And but we haven't proposed that because we've been, going through needing new leadership for contributor growth working group.
Yeah.
So we don't want to propose it if there's nobody to do the reviews.
No, I feel like the tag as a whole is stretched really thin with people who have time to actually act on things outside of our meetings.
The so yeah, and so like the reason it's going away with going ahead with governance stuff is that we have at least me and Dawn, and maybe other people in the future. Maybe we'll get April back. Maybe other people will get interested in this whole governance thing. The particularly if we have more structure around it. If you follow me, I think one of the problems that we've had in the past is there hasn't been a lot of tasks that people could take on that they felt were separable.
What do you mean by separable?
In other words, something that they could take on where they could do just that task.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So which is a classic contributor growth thing, right? Is you need to have tasks that people can take on only one task, because even if they eventually end up being long-term contributors, they start with one task.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing for every project, including ours.
Yeah, no, we are definitely experiencing all the same pains
Yep.
of the projects we're advising.
Yeah. And so that's actually the other big thing for governance, right? Is that we need to recruit some new committee members for governance working group, so that we can have some rotation. I mean, that actually escalates up to tag contributor strategy in general, right? Because technically, I should have rotated out of the chair position already.
Yeah, I agree. This is a
had a viable
tag
candidate.
problem.
Yeah,
this is not just contributor growth. Or sorry, it's not just governance. Contributor growth is experiencing this. It's very strongly as well. Yeah, we have like the same 3 or 4 people just somehow trying to like shadow do everything.
Yeah.
I don't know, as a tag, not here, we should talk about this more. I think we brought it up a couple times, but we haven't really said if there's any actionable stuff we can do to recruit, and start addressing that.
Yeah. I mean, one of our problems for this tag in particular is that we're recruiting out of a relatively small pool.
Yeah.
Which is that reasonably, particularly for anybody who's going to, potentially become a new leader, this has to be somebody who has experience as an open source community manager.
Yeah.
And ideally experience with more than one project, although that's not necessarily required, as Catherine has demonstrated. So that's the other thing. So are we missing anything on our roadmap for governance working group? I mean, aside from this working group proposal getting sort of tossed into it, but that didn't originate with us.
I don't think so. And I think if we add any more, we're being very unrealistic about what we can do.
Yeah. I mean, these are the things that, like, these roadmap items, these are what you call realistic roadmap items, rather than what do they call it on Kickstarter? Bonus goals, something like that.
Yep.
As in, these are things that Dawn and I think we can get done with us, plus the occasional volunteers who contribute to things.
Yeah. Well, we've got Emily now.
Yep.
Hey, Emily.
Hello. I apologize that I was not able to attend for the entire thing. I'm in between meetings.
Yeah, no, you said that was going to be the way, so. Okay. But your timing is good because we can go to this working group.
Yep. So thank you all for taking the time to add this into the agenda. As you know, this has been a source of community attention for a while. Based off of the March 21st meeting and the discussions that followed within the TOC, we provided next steps forward. regarding elevating some of the recommendations and proposals for changes to moving levels. We want to provide a variety of avenues for community members to make sure that they feel heard, that their concerns are being identified and addressed, or at least heavily considered as part of a refresh of the process. So not just limiting it necessarily to a maintainer survey, because the maintainers are really the ones that do take on a lot of the work associated with moving levels. They're the ones that are responsible for bringing their community members alongside of it. But also any adopters and stakeholders along that process of moving levels. But we also wanted to ensure that other community members outside of those two groups had an equitable opportunity for their voices to be heard and for some of those concerns to be raised. So what we wanted to do is ask the contributor strategy group whether or not they have the capacity and the interest to establish a working group to facilitate this level of community feedback and discussion. There are some considerations associated with it. We want to ensure that the group can provide a collaborative space for interested community members to recommend consensual improvements and adjustments, even major changes to the concepts of moving levels within the foundation. We'd like to have those proposals reach consensus within the working group and tag contributor strategy prior to a 2-week public review to allow folks that are not currently contributors within the group to ensure that they have a chance to provide feedback with an appropriate adjudication period, at which point the TOC will take recommendations from the group, the maintainer person, the maintainer survey, in-person conversations at Keep Kind of You against the technical considerations that we currently have when evaluating projects, and some adopter input, because we have been hearing from adopters some questions around the moving levels process to develop a new comprehensive proposal that will also be subject to a public comment period, adjudication, finalization, awareness, publishing, and a complete rollout strategy associated with that. So there's a lot to kind of take in here. I do know that there are many community members who are not able to be on this call today who are interested. So I want to make sure that we're trying that this group isn't restricted to just in-person meetings like this or virtual meetings like this. We want to make sure that there is equal opportunity for asynchronous improvements and recommendations to that. So that is the ask that the TOC has of tag contributor strategy. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, so the primary job of this working group is going to be data and feedback collection.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, but Emily, you seem to imply in there that you're hoping the working group puts together a concrete proposal as well.
Correct. From that data and feedback collection from the community members that are participating.
Right.
So I want to make sure that we don't have any cross-influencing between the different avenues of where we're requesting this. We definitely want to reach out to the maintainers who are doing a lot of this work and make sure that we're having well-informed conversations with them about their recommendations, but also making sure that even if you're not a maintainer, if you're a technical lead in a SIG or a group, or if you are a lead contributor or just a new contributor to a project, that you have other avenues of ensuring that your concerns or your recommendations are being funneled in. And we see this working group as serving that function.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. I mean, it makes sense for that to be under tag contributor strategy. I'd like to see, for example, for one thing, we should see whether or not any of the TOC members are interested in participating in it. Well, actually, we need TOC members to participate in it, right? Because there's aspects of the whole matriculation process that only TOC members are involved in.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, one of the challenges with feedback collection is going to be getting representative feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course, the initial feedback that we would get with just a cattle call is going to be whoever recently had a problem,
Correct.
which is
Yep.
useful to hear, but we don't want to hear only that.
Exactly. And this was something that the TUC members had talked about with regard to the maintainer survey. And I would expect it to be mirrored here, is that there needs to be some pointed driving questions around the experience thus far, what has worked well about it, as well as the negative aspects of that experience. So it does need to be a balanced conversation. I know sometimes when we're experiencing challenges or difficulties in the course of our work, there is a cathartic release with showcasing some of the challenges that we've experienced. But I want to ensure that every recommendation or every problem statement that comes into the group has an equal balance of a recommended solution to solve some of those problems that's in alignment with the current activities that maintainers are balancing right now, as well as the maturity that we actually seek within projects, as well as the heightened focus that's been coming out, particularly with project security and governance, as well as the general health and well-being of a project, to be able to sustain beyond just the current batch of contributors and maintainers that are working within it. So we want to ensure that there is a lifetime of opportunity for projects moving between those levels. Did that answer your question, Josh?
Yeah. So yeah, no, I mean, I was just thinking about it more because, in my sort of adjunct duties for CNCF, I'm the survey guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just thinking about in terms of how to structure a data collection effort.
Yep. So I see that as being a few things to start with. I can see one of the initial efforts of this working group would be to create a structure in which they can actively solicit that balanced level of feedback from community members, as well as interested parties in the working group also coming forth with their own proposals or recommendations, and trying to balance it that way. So from there, taking into consideration how you solicit that level of feedback so it's balanced, as well as the contributors to this working group's personal recommendations or observations and experiences, and then working through and developing specific changes for moving levels. It doesn't necessarily need to consider the criteria associated with it, but I don't want to remove that because I do think that there are community members that have valid concerns associated with some of their observations with projects, whether or not they're an adopter or even a maintainer that's being subjected to some of those criteria requirements.
Emily, can I stop you real quick? Sorry, because I'm trying to take notes at the same time, so I'm like 5 seconds behind you here. Did I hear you say that the focus for this working group would not be on specific milestones listed in the levels? But
No,
I feel like I heard you wrong.
I want to make sure that the group feels comfortable making some of those changes. I don't want to exclude it. So if it's a matter of focusing on what are the current data points that exist around projects moving levels that reinforce some of those pain points or experiences, as well as the positive experiences that they have associated with that. If that is a particular criteria, we should make sure that that's captured and focused, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just that. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that those are not excluded.
Okay.
What kind of timeline are we thinking about for this?
As with most things, this will probably take a good bit of time. We've got KubeCon coming up, so there will be some in-person conversations there, and then I'm expecting a slowdown in community activity afterwards, just as everyone kind of breathes from it. We also have the summer coming up, so I do know that community member availability is likely to be very limited over the course of that time, and doing any kind of data collection or structured data collection does take time as well. So I don't want to provide a fixed timeline associated with this, but I would like to have a rough draft proposal in the works, maybe around the time that North America wraps up, if that's realistic. I do know that this will take a fair amount of time, and we do have many projects that are currently moving levels who would be good points of reference for getting some of that data from.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking about, right? Which is one of the best things to do would be to take a project that had just moved levels or for that matter, actually a project that had failed to move levels,
Mhm.
because this is going to be particularly useful to hear from,
Hi, Dave.
and kind of like immediately get them to provide us with feedback. Like we could start like right now just with free-form feedback,
Mhm.
where we work out how to structure it. The and because they're going to have more to say about the process immediately after they participate in it than they're going to have at any other time.
Mhm. Dave, to catch you up real quick, we started a little ahead of where I thought we were. So the meeting notes document has a lot of the current discussion around primarily initially focusing on data feedback and collection of said feedback for moving those levels, making sure that the working group is structured. That way they can go and request that level of feedback, as well as consolidate their learnings and observations from that for consensus and recommendations to the TOC moving forward. That way we can consider that with the results of the maintainer survey, as well as those in-person conversations at KubeCon Europe.
Cool. That sounds good. I don't know if you guys covered this already, but I know we had like a collection of particularly vocal community members. And I don't know if we wanted to either like focus on ensuring that we've addressed those concerns or focus on ensuring that we hear from people that aren't the super vocal ones we've already heard from, or maybe both.
Both
I
generally. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, so one of the things I mentioned here early on is like I said, one of my adjunct duties for CNCF is I'm the survey guy, which I'm doing on the strength of having taken a year-long data collection course in psychology in college, but that seems to be more formal education than most other people have had within our ecosystem. Although we do have a couple of other people, right? Like I'm going to actually, once we get this launched, I'm going to hit up like Sophie Vargas and a couple of other people who are true experts in this area, and see if they have advice. The is sort of, I mean, starting from my experiences, my inclination is to focus, is to not, is to have sort of our last focus on the people who have already been vocal, because the thing about the people who've already been vocal is we already know a lot of what they have to say. Like anything focused on them would be very structured, right? Because like a couple of projects have really complained about the process. And so honestly, if I was coming to them with anything, I would say, okay, so what did you like about the process, right? What things do you want us to not change? Because we've already heard what you want us to change. The but I mean, particularly for some of the folks who have spoken up very loudly, they've claimed to be representative of an entire class of projects, but we don't know that that's necessarily actually the case. I think if we have good data collection, we'll find that how the experiences sort of shake out is much more nuanced than that.
I have a question.
Down to sometimes just having to do with timing.
I feel like we're starting to talk about how we would attempt to collect the data. Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, the ask for today or just in general from the tag at this point is, do we have sufficient people to properly do this, what we're being asked?
Mhm.
And then once we come together, that's when we can, if we say yes, then we can start figuring out how do we ensure that we're accurately and equitably collecting this feedback and making sure that people feel heard, everything else we've discussed. But I just want to make sure that we circle back to that first question, because I am not confident it's an instant, easy yes. So I want to make sure while we still have time, we talk about that and just get agreement on, can we do this? Do we have the right people and the correct amount of time to commit to it?
Yeah, and I think understanding a little bit more about how it would be structured or scoped within the group certainly helps level set kind of expectations on volunteers that are willing to participate in this, as well as the timelines that we're looking at for it. Certainly, if there's only 2 individuals that are interested in doing this and there isn't a lot of community interest in facilitating this level of discussion, we're not going to get very far very fast.
Yes.
So I want to make sure that we're kind of clear on what the expectations of the group are, because that will either drive people to it or drive them away, depending on what they're looking to get out of this, if it's a platform for their voice or if it's for driving meaningful and actionable change to the foundation and moving those levels.
My first question is, we mentioned the word working group. Are we interested in having is this a short-term effort to kind of collect this feedback, come up with recommendations, and then finish? Or is the idea that this would be a long-term function of this tag?
In my mind, and Dave, I'm curious as what your perspective of this is that I see this initially starting as a short-term activity that could develop into a longer-term activity to make sure that we have a clearly defined process for incorporating community member feedback, as well as doing more data-driven decisions around those experiences by maintainers.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess quickly to respond, since you were curious about my opinion, I initially had viewed this as a short-term thing of like right now there's a lot of like activity, I don't know, I almost called it noise, but like a lot of activity from all sorts of different directions on this topic that we need to make sure is heard. But because you asked that question, maybe think about it, like I don't anticipate us coming up with a process that is magical and makes everybody suddenly be happy and all of that to go away. So there will need to be some way that we ensure that everyone feels that they are heard long-term. And I think so far, the only thing we have is people complaining directly to the TOC, or like complaining to themselves that the TOC isn't getting things done and that not even getting to the TOC. So I think right now this is a short-term thing, but we also need to come up with a long-term thing that is sustainable for the community to feel like they are heard.
It might be actually several working groups that convene,
Yep.
finish, and then like come back again. Like, so even though like we're saying, yes, we can see these problems right now, I don't think we're really attached to what like the longer term structure looks like.
Yep.
Yeah. My recommendation would be very strongly towards a time boxed or goal oriented engagement that it's easier to get volunteers for, we're going to be doing this for 6 months or 3 months or oh gosh, I hope shorter. And then if we need effort from people, again, we do that. As soon as it becomes this like indefinite long-term thing, I feel like it's just a cliff of like, no one can commit to that, you know? Yeah.
That's entirely fair.
There is deliverable. We will be something like done at some point.
Yeah.
It's a fair point.
So based off of the discussion that we've had thus far, kind of creating some of the scoping as well as a little bit more around the structure and the intended artifacts of this working group. Do you have any other questions that would better prepare you to figure out if this is something that contributor strategy can take on and potentially get volunteers to participate in?
We can definitely put it out, and then whether or not it actually makes progress is whether or not it attracts volunteers, basically. And for that matter, volunteers with the right kind of skills, right? Because we could have a bunch of people who are in, and then that'll come down to timeline, right? Because if we have a bunch of people who are enthusiastic but don't know anything about, systematically surveying and collecting feedback from people, then they'll get there eventually, but it won't be this year, right?
Amy.
So I think the only thing we can do is to actually sort of put a structure out there, announce it on the TOC, et cetera, and see if we have people who can help with it.
Yep. Amy, do you know if the foundation has any potential resources that Tag Contributor Strategy could leverage in assisting in the data structure and analysis portion of this to ensure that the group has the correct expertise or at least advisors available to them?
We do have research. I can reach out to research. That'd be where I would start for that, because I think that's probably like the right place. Josh also mentioned some other people that he wanted to be able to get involved. And I'm not as familiar with those, so I know that we do have like both internal and external resources. So,
yeah, I was basically thinking about ping because I've done stuff on surveys, et cetera, for open source projects before, And I
This
had
almost
a
seems more
couple of
like
experts on my old podcast. And it would be nice to get those people in just for sort of commenting and advice on
no,
this.
the way that Emily framed this is actually more like how to be able to set up like a research task group to be
Yeah.
able to get the correct framing and scope. If Emily, if I'm hearing you right, that is more of the request. It's not just about like a survey. It's more about
Correct.
it almost feels like a consultant sort of like.
Yeah, so I think having the survey is one mechanism in which we can do that, and that'll provide us with that structured data points to be able to leverage. But I do believe, and based off of the TOC's initial discussion, some form of free-form collect from working group members that do have their own perspectives and ideas should also be in order to ensure like sometimes recommendations can feel constrained or bounded through survey firms. I believe this is something that we've talked about in the past. So having both of those areas would be beneficial. But I still see that as within the working group's purview to make sure that they're balancing both of those needs and concerns.
Josh, would you be interested in being involved with this working group?
Well, certainly being involved with setting up the structure for it.
Yeah.
I'm cautious about overcommitting.
Yeah, like my
Um,
gut says we don't have someone right now on the tag who has the capacity to lead this right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not thinking of someone. I know I personally can't.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest concern, is finding someone who can lead getting this going and moving stuff in the right direction, or identifying someone who's not on the tag and making sure that they have the skills and capacity to do something like that. And we trust that would work well and be successful. But I don't know, Emily, if you were on the call earlier, we were discussing that we have the tag itself at the moment does not have enough leads and enough volunteers who have time. And that's why I brought up long-term commitments, because we're suffering from that problem right now in this tag. So I think we'll have to reach out and maybe talk to people to see, like, identify candidates who could help lead this and see if they would be interested, and do a bit of like active reach out to find someone who can run this well.
I wonder if it would be beneficial to engage with the ambassadors to see if there's a few folks from there that would be interested in taking this on. I feel like with a lot of the reboot and the restructuring that's been going on with the ambassador program, there may be a lot of opportunities there to both get more contributors to tag contributor strategy associated with it, while still embodying the leadership principles that it would be necessary to successfully lead this kind of activity. Dave, are there other avenues for which we can potentially identify leads or interested parties in this?
No, I mean, the most obvious thing that comes to mind is the last thing you said, interested parties. And then I get really hesitant because of the first question I asked of like, if we just say like, you people care a lot, maybe you drive this, then we're most likely to get very biased results based on the reason that those people care a lot. Like, I don't know, I have an axe to grind against this part of the process. Look, I now have a lot of data about how this part of the process sucks.
I don't think anyone will have any trust if it's one of the people who has strongly raised concerns about our current processes. It needs to be someone who is not involved. It's someone who looks unbiased, right?
Yeah, and for them, it's actually a reason why, even if I had the time, it would not be good for me to head up this particular working group, since I've been on the other end, which is mostly fairly vocally defending a lot of parts of our current process. So it would be better if it was somebody new.
I love the suggestion of ambassadors. I think that is very likely to find us someone who's capable of leading this and would be interested in doing it, not because they have a personal gain in it, just, but they care.
Okay.
If one of you draft like a concise statement, I can get that over to the ambassadors, I think.
Okay, Yeah,
Like I want it to be able to come from the group rather than me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah. I mean, we should also throw it in the TOC, right? We just
Oh, put it on
seated a bunch
TOC
of new
lists,
TOC members,
put it out there, but
and
then
like we
also
said
like the
before, we really want at least one TOC member actively working on this. So
I think the challenge that I'm seeing most directly right now is timing. Because we're running into like you all have your own plans. Those plans are all still here. Just because we have this need doesn't necessarily mean that we have time for it. So I think part of the proposal could also be this is a August, September, October effort. And in October, the recommendations are this is what we think we should do to move forward, and we present it at KubeCon North America. And that I think when we're putting these like requests together, that's how we should frame this, like really, really, really tightly scoped in time. Because the thing that I hear the most out of, frankly, all of you is like, my bandwidth. Where is it?
Yes, you were picking up on that correctly.
and so because of that, like, I want to be able to like not let the dauntingness of the whole piece kind of like rise, and I want to be able to time box it in a way that we have enough time to be able to get the right people in the room, enough time to be able to get the questions that we would want to be able to have the answers to, and then a kind of a chance to be able to complete it with an
Yeah.
opportunity to be able to say at the end, this group will reconvene tracking towards honestly, I kind of use the KubeCons for this, like just a little bit, like tracking towards like we're going to reconvene back towards like North America around this. Is that reasonable?
I think that's very helpful. That's a great way to frame it.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes the way that I refer to this when we're like kind of looking at all these things, what problems do I not want to have by the next KubeCon?
Yeah.
And I think being able to have people be conflicted and frustrated with the matriculation process is a great thing to be able to say. I want to be able to have different problems around this by North America. Is that
I love your optimism. Looking forward to having different problems. That's great.
See,
Yeah.
see,
Yep.
this is how you can do this. And if we can, if you agree with me around like the goodness, like we're going to be running out of space. We want to be able to keep the momentum. We want to be able to track towards this to be able to happen towards like the end of the summer, and through the fall. I think you're more likely to be able to get engaged parties.
Yeah.
And I didn't use the word interested. I said engaged because like if you know that this is coming, you have time to be able to plan for it in your bandwidth, really.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll go put that in the notes as far as like how I see the structure going, because I think that's really critical for when we're actually like putting this out and getting volunteers for it. So, all right, I will pause and I will go put this over in notes. Move on to the next topic then.
Josh, for the action item of making the concise statement that we can put out to ambassadors in the TOC, is that something that you have time? I can help collaborate on that. Is that something you'd be interested in doing?
yeah, we
Just so
can
we
do
have a
that. I mean, I
name.
guess one of my questions is based on Amy's thing is, do we even want to try to send that out before KubeCon? I'm leaning towards no.
That's a good point. I think definitely being able to say we met, we understand this is a big problem. We're going to be looking for more feedback around this, but based on, and I don't want to say based on constraints around people's availability, we want to be able to do this like later than the year. Is that fair? Like we're not ignoring it. We are looking at the problem. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I do want to advise that I don't want to completely lose the current momentum around this. I want to ensure that folks that are probably have ideas percolating, that they have a place where they can go and put them, or at least an individual to contact, or some form to say like this is coming and I can follow up at a particular avenue. I don't know what that looks like, but I think having something along those lines, whether or not it's an issue on tag contributor strategies repo or a placeholder meeting doc to kind of collect some of this.
Yeah.
I like the idea of an issue.
Yeah, I think an issue can be
I was
more
going to
open.
suggest
Yeah.
like a Google form for people to be able to like come by and like here, put yourself on like a list. But an issue because it's
Yeah.
public and available.
Yep.
And I guess this kind of goes back to the roadmap discussion as well, as like this should go on the roadmap.
I mean, yeah, we're doing it. If we say we're going to do it, I think this should go on our roadmap. If it's a big time commitment like this is, and a hard commitment to the TOC, it should be on there. Yeah.
Definitely. And then as you're thinking about this, what other things are going to fall off the roadmap because this went on?
This is why I love you.
We hate that conversation. We hate that. But like, what thing falls off the train because it's been on?
Yes. Yes.
Be deliberate in those choices. I don't have an answer for what falls off.
Yeah.
I want to submit the idea that it could. Something could fall off because this got added.
Yeah. Well, I mean, realistically, like if I end up doing the write-up for this, what's going to happen is that's going to postpone doing the write-up for how to run an election. So, which actually I don't think I can afford to postpone because I need that write-up for Kubernetes as well. So, so really what's happening is, at least from the perspective of this tag, it's more that we put this on the roadmap, but barring somebody new getting involved, it's not going to be in a high position. So if we run out of energy, it's going to happen later.
I'm concerned that this is important enough that to not have a strong commitment that the tag is going to do this. That like we can't leave it in that weird state where it's acceptable or possibly being planned for falling off. Like it either needs to be important and we do it, or we hand it off to someone else to see it through. Because I feel like there's a lot of frustration. There's some strong feelings all around, and we can't just let it be like, maybe we'll get to it. It has to be addressed. And I know that's really awful for me to say and then not commit to leading it, but that's just my read on what I'm hearing from the people involved. And, you know.
Yeah, Doug, you threw up a thumb. You've been awful quiet. Happy to be able to hear your thoughts.
No, I'm afraid I'm already labeled as one of the guys who's very, very vocal about this, like on the TOC call. No, I agree with what Carolyn said, right? I agree. This is very important. You don't want to give the appearance of it being pushed off to the side and then not being taken seriously. But at the same time, I'm not in a position myself to volunteer to lead it either. I'll contribute as much as I can, but I can't take a leadership role in it. And but I do think it's very important. And in fact, what's ironic about it is I actually feel like the sooner this gets resolved, the easier the TOC's life might be if we do it right.
It's one of those like chicken egg problems.
Yes. Yes.
I think we're all really mindful that like there's a lot of friction around the process currently, but we're not in a position to be able to see the best path forward. And that's why we need this working group.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So I mean, what falls off the roadmap is really going to depend on which existing TOC people get involved with it. And that's really going to come down to the existing leads at this point, because the other people who are involved with the TOC are involved, or they're involved with the tag, are involved in very different things. Like none of the mentorship people are going to be interested in this, for example. None of the infra people are going to be suitable for this, because the reason why they're into infra is they're infra people. You know, so if it's me, it would mean pushing back something else like having a firm template for governance review.
Thinking about this a little differently, like this work stream is already rising. Completing the things that like are already working is actually like really valuable as well. I don't think we have the right people in this particular meeting to be able to make this decision. We don't have enough people here to be able to make this. So like, let's continue to figure out how to be able to scope this. And Carolyn, let's you and I take like 15 minutes to be able to like write down the concise like statement so that we have something, and then we can decide when to send it.
Okay. Yeah, I think getting that out sooner is better, because I think the success of this is going to hinge on having someone with time as a lead, and we don't have that right now. Yeah.
Exactly. And now that we know that that's the constraint, let's write down what it is, what problem we're trying to solve, and see who can step up to be able to maybe come help take this on.
Yeah.
Okay. See?
Okay.
All new problems. We want new problems.
Yep. Okay. So going forward, so we're at the hour, and by the way, I wanted to make sure everybody the tag saw. Catherine posted a link to a sign up schedule for the tag contributor strategy kiosk at KubeCon. So please take a shift if you can, since we need to make sure that stays staffed, and that we're there. And I need to run off to the FCD community meeting. So
Okay.
Good to
Amy,
see
let's
you
sync
back
up
to work.
after this. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll come find
All
you.
right.
Okay. More to come.
thanks,
Bye all.
everyone.
Thanks.